For the third 2025. Impossible scenes as people are rounding down, doubling down even on Sir Lewis Hamilton's chances of winning a championship in 2025. Are they lying to themselves? Is this naysayer Lewis Hamilton's season, or are they talking the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? And me as a noddy Sir Lewis Hamilton fan, my temperament and my shoulders aren't broad, no robust enough to handle it. We're going to discuss today because everybody's chiming in on it all of a sudden. Max, Marie, Crackosaurus. Oh, the humanity indeed. First, let's talk about Bernie Ecclestone, who's talked about Maximilian Verstappen and he's not insubstantial chances of winning a fifth back-to-back. It's going to get techie, although the odds makers say that Maximilian Verstappen stands a 20% chance of winning as versus Lando Norris's 40% chance going into the Australian Grand Prix, the first of 24 in 2025. Here's what Bernie has to say though. That's notwithstanding all of the Maximilian Verstappen naysayers and the down-talking. Bernie Ecclestone says, I still think Max will win it in 2025. If there's a title and he has a chance, there's no reason why he shouldn't. He says if he's got the equipment, obviously there shouldn't be any discussion about him. It would be a definite. If the car's up to it, Max Verstappen will get the job done. No kidding, Sherlock. Tell us something that we don't know. Bernie, in other news, is water still wet? Like, what are we doing? Of course, if Max Verstappen has the machinery, he more than likely will win himself a championship. But the odds makers at 20% are factoring now Maximilian Verstappen clearly not having the car, the machinery commensurate to challenging a Lando Norris or a modern day Jean Alesi or a Oscar Jack Piastri. It's going to get techier than techie things, chat. I'm telling you, again at the altar of who's going to win a title of the drivers variety in 2025. Oh, by the way, Lando Norris has given an interview to NBC. We talked a little bit about it earlier. There's self-doubt, there's confidence or lack thereof. In it, there's a couple threads at which we need to pull, all of which are fairly relevant. He says of his performance last year that I made a couple mistakes. Understatement of the year, Lando. This is the problem with Lando going into 2025. I don't think he understands the length and breadth nor the overall extent of his errors of the unforced variety in 2024, and that has to mean something. Going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, not that I ever have been yet, going to one of those meetings and the first step to salvation is admitting that you have a problem, is it not? This is not maths nor calculus. This is very basic counting, is it not? And I feel I would contend that Lando Norris going into 2025 hasn't yet stepped nor navigated nor even circumvented that very first stage. I think he's an alcoholic who doesn't know he has a problem. I made a couple mistakes. What are you talking about? A couple means two, no, if you look it up in a dictionary. How about Hungary? What about Austria? What about Silverstone as a team? What about Monza being too conservative into the second chicane? That's four right off the top of the dome. And there were many, many more. So what's he talking about? A couple of mistakes. Maybe Lando, this is him understating the truth with a view to cope, but there's a very fine line, some say, between coping and delusion. And again, I still can't read Lando Norris to say definitively on what side of that fence he sits going into the all-important 2025 season. Oh, and by the way, he's asked about Max's weaknesses and what is there in Max that he can exploit going into 2025. What did you learn, Lando Norris, on the back of 2025 that you can leverage with a view to get yourself to the mountaintop? Lando responds, well, Max doesn't really have any weaknesses. Many, if any at all. He's the greatest, probably the greatest F1 driver in history. He's designed much more for F1 than I am. He's just much more. What? What are we doing here? Lando Norris, an F1 driver, talking down himself and by extension bigging up Max Verstappen. I've never heard an F1 driver talk like that. And I mean, humility is a good thing, right? In the right bloody hands, under the right circumstance. Lando Norris saying that Max is probably the best F1 driver in history. Surely that's no way to go about trying to beat that chap. You were asked about weaknesses, and I can quote a couple. As good as Maximilian Verstappen is, and Lando Norris should be able to. Maybe he's playing it coy. Maybe he's keeping the exam answers in his back pocket so that he can exploit them. Why, some say, would he reveal them if indeed there is agency and there's a competition to be won? But it sounds like Lando doesn't feel like Max has any weaknesses, not ones that he can exploit. Asked about the F1 game, is there anything you can learn from it? He says, well, the mechanical functions, how to set up a car, the impact of putting more downforce or taking some off. Indeed, that the new F1 game is very realistic. One thing that you won't get, however, the difference between any game, any sim, iRacing and the real thing is the fear. The consequences are very different. You don't need to go and talk to Mr. Beast in the Formula E car. The consequences of driving a car in real life and getting it wrong are real. They can be devastating, says Lando Norris. On the game, you just push the button, right? Yeet it into the barrier as Charles Leclerc did in France a couple of years ago. If that were on the game, you just hit resume last saved game, right? There are no consequences. And in that will always be the difference between the sim and a game, irrespective of how realistic it will be. The NBC interviewer says, Lando, as at the final race afterwards, Abu Dhabi last year, you said next year, 2025, will be my year. Why did you say that, Lando? And do you still think the same? Lando continues, I'm confident. We'll need to start on the right foot, but in 24 races, there will be many. There's a lot of racing to be done and a lot of road to travel, says Lando. The interviewer asks him, who's the best at trash talking on the grid? And here's where it gets techier than techie things. Umanch, Chiba, Daniel. Because Lando Norris responds as follows. I don't like doing trash talking, sledging, the thing that characterised or made so great a Michael Jordan as an example. Lando says that's not my thing, really. He says, though, and continues, that I don't think it really works well in F1. We're all in the helmets. We can't get at each other like you can in an NBA game or a football game. He says, you think it happens in a lot of other sports, but there were a couple of drivers in 2024 who were trying to do a lot of trash talking at the end of last year, but I don't know, says Lando, how well it landed. About whom might Lando be talking, if not King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk? Lest we forget Qatar last year. I'm not going to be bullied. Max said he was going to put me on my head, and I think that's a bit out of order. Nobody will stand up to this dude. If Max in 2021 had happened, flip reverse, that Michael Massey will be still running for his life. Those are George Russell's words, not mine. Is Lando then poking fun at his old mate King George? I thought those two were like this, tight, best buddies. Apparently not, which is interesting. Again, at the altar of beating Max, why can't he trash talk Max Verstappen that way, banter Max Verstappen that way? Maybe they're too close, I don't know. But leveraging a couple of cheeky bobs at one George Russell. Interviewer then goes on to ask Lando Norris the question of the day. Two Ferrari drivers, Lewis or Charles, who have you got going into 2025? Lando does the PR thing. He says for Lewis, it would be incredible. Listen, he's probably already the goatiest of all goats. But if you could win an unprecedented eighth, then that tips him over the edge beyond reasonable doubt. Therefore, Lando says, I'd love to see it happen. He's the most successful pretty much already, but I respect Charles. He's a brilliant driver. Charles Leclerc, aka modern day Journalese, is ridiculously fast, says Lando Norris. He's one of the best, and so we'll see. Cliffhanger, EastEnders settings, non-committal from Lando Norris, which is techie. He can do that. I mean, he's friends with both, right? So you can't ask him to commit. Therefore, he sells the question from NBC. But again, I thought it was insightful. I thought it means something that Lando speaks about how ridiculously fast he thinks Charles Leclerc is. But no sells ultimately the answer. So too, by the way, Damon Hill chimed in on Speed Cafe's YouTube along the same lines. Damon Hill apparently will be in attendance, having not long been relinquished of his duties for the internationally syndicated Sky F1 broadcast. Why did he leave? Well, he insinuated that it had something to do with his comments around Max Verstappen, Dick Dastardly's settings. Sport doesn't build character, it reveals character. Max Verstappen fans around the world were none too happy, and I understand it. I've argued that I don't think Damon was shooting a million miles away from the target. He wasn't a million miles away saying that Max is very aggressive, but his rapping, the way in which he articulated his point, again, was always going to cheese off Max Verstappen and the powers that be, was it not? So sometimes you've got to massage some backs and kiss some babies, shake some hands. And I think that area of it, Damon Hill's far too old school to not just speak his mind. The Dick Dastardly thing was a bit too far, I would argue. So too saying that sport doesn't build character, it reveals it. What are you talking about, Damon, in this context? It makes sense. Max Verstappen 4, soon to be 5. What are we talking about? But on this, Damon is asked to chime in on Ferrari. What do you think about the move? Lewis Hamilton going to Scuderia to race alongside, point to point, the quickest dude in the game currently. Damon Hill says, this one-time champion 1996, says, I think it's a good move for Lewis. I think he'll know, though, exactly how quick Charles is already. But Lewis is a very determined individual, continues Damo. He's proven everyone wrong in just about every single facet possible hitherto, thus far in his career. And so you can't really make any predictions, says Damo. When Lewis is in a race, he just gets in his groove like he did at Silverstone, and he's borderline, as near as makes no difference, impossible to beat. And so therefore, he's still got all that talent, says Damo. However, and here's the big but, a but bigger than big things. However, says Damo, if I'm going to go out on a limb, I'd say that perhaps he's lost a bit of qualifying pace. Let me repeat that. Damon Hill, 1996 champion, one time, says, if I'm going to go out on a limb, I think that perhaps Sir Lewis Hamilton has lost a bit of qualifying pace, and that as at the 9th of the 3rd, 2025, potentially Charles might be slightly quicker than him on a one-lapper. OG Zilla, you're a legend. Let's pause for thought before we dissect that. OG Zilla says, Lando, just like Charles, have yet to prove themselves in close championship battle. In my opinion, they have not been battle hardened, yet to be forged in fire. Far too kind, OG Zilla. And I don't disagree with you, but can you, this is the argument that we had on the shakedown a couple of weeks back, right? Can you prejudice a Lando? I suppose you could argue that Lando was in a fight in the second half of last year, but I mean, did he have the car to challenge in the first half? I don't know. After Miami, but you need a car the entire season long, Lando Norris fans would say. Charles, I suppose you could argue in 2022 at the start of, before they introduced that technical directive and encouraged all of the other bloody teams to raise their ride height. Charles was a challenger for a second there for Max Verstappen. But I suppose you could argue, again, if you're fans of either Charles Leclerc or Lando Norris, I think you could argue the fact that neither one of them have had the car requisite, no necessary to challenge a Max or a Lewis for 24 races, and that would be their excuse. And I don't want to prejudice against either way. You know that I like riffing against Lando Norris or a modern day Jean Alesi in Charles Leclerc. But I think if you're being honest, again, what we don't want to do is sacrifice truth value nor objectivity at the altar of any cognitive dissonance worth its name. And if I'm not going to do that, what I don't want to do is prejudice against these dudes for circumstances that they are yet to encounter. Oh, the humanity. Do you, Damon, say that sort of stuff about Lewis's one-lap pace from experience? Do you think as you get older into your early 40s, Damon Hill, or late 30s even, do you think that you tend to lose a tenth or two? Damon responds, yeah, and this is pertinent, really salient and very poignant from one-time champion 1996 Damon Hill. He says, when you're in your 20s, it's all seat of the pants stuff. It's all your internal gyroscope. You don't think, you feel, to quote the late great Bruce Lee, that in your 20s, it's all instinct, the way that you drive the car. But as you get older, he says that you've almost got to unlearn your experience. Risk management comes with being in your late 30s and 40s, and that will hinder you, particularly as far as your pace over the course of one lap. He says, but sometimes, even if you're in your late 30s, 40s, it can come together, notwithstanding in broad strokes the fact that you've lost a tenth or two. Super insightful for Damon Hill. And I think if anybody can speak to having lost a tenth or two, 1995, 1997, 98, thereafter, Damon Hill is the one for that. No, that being said, super brave, Damon. You imagine Ayrton Senna, the greatest driver, crashes it, yeets into your car and perishes in 1994. And then the next week they're telling you they don't understand what happened to that car, whether it was the steering column, whether it bottomed out and destroyed the ground effect and the bloody aero. And yet you want me to buckle up my 6-point harness in the very same car. I mean, built different, to use the words of Sir Lewis Hamilton. That, ladies and gentlemen, for me is built different. Let's talk about Helmut, Marko. Charles is more mature than Lando. Is he, Stephen? Do you think so? I see your point, Stephen. I wouldn't disagree as much as I like to disagree. Charles looks like he has room to grow. Lando looks like he's still playing in the schoolyard. He's fast in quali, but he's rapid. Daniel, this is the point. It's not just quali. This is why, listen, the reason people say, why do you always come down like a ton of bricks? I see that Cameron hates Lando. I don't hate Lando. How can you hate Lando if, again, sporting endeavour par excellence is the restaurant at which you dine? I am that guy. And when I watch something like Zandvoort, gaps Max Verstappen to the tune of 20 plus seconds. I mean, Lando's not a bad driver. He can drive the SH1T out of a car. He's brilliant. He's right there with Max and Charles and Sir Lewis. But again, what he lacks for, not to bloody labour the point, but what he lacks for is the ability to consolidate for a pole position over the course of a first lap, defensive posture, dial in the appropriate amount of revs to launch it properly off the line. He lacks what Michael Schumacher had in abundance, what Sebastian Vettel made an industry-known career out of, which was dropping it on pole, consolidating first position off the line, defensive posture, defending into turn one, and then lights the flag victory. Lando Norris, some may say, especially if in 2025 he has the quickest machine on the grid, needs to make an industry out of, no a career, not a season out of it, just as Sebastian Vettel did. Because what he doesn't want to do is end up on the same piece of track as Maximilian Verstappen, as he did so many times last season. Imola, Canada, bloody Austria. Can't do it. It's not going to work out well for him. That's not the line of least resistance. Some might argue it's been a long winter, Pope San Miguel. No kidding, Sherlock. Couldn't Lando have been ready for moments, given how long he's been in F1? True, Chiba, I get it. But I mean, it's different, isn't it? When you're running around, when you're racing for third and fourth, it's very different. The pressure, the circumstance, the level at which you have to drive every single bloody lap as near as makes no difference. It's a different set of equations for which you need to solve. And in that sense, I do want to give Lando a bit of grace, but best believe he's got to show and prove this year. Behave yourself, Cam. Charles touches max level, then crashes. Norris as well. Go on then, Umar. I think, modern day journalism, who coined the phrase? I understand that Charles has a cheeky error of the unforced variety in his locker. Always has done, and I would argue always will do. It's the way he drives. He's cut from the Gilles Villeneuve cloth 10/10, right? And with that, there comes a unforced error tax to be paid. However, the challenge for Charles Leclerc last year was to trend down those mistakes to as near as makes no difference, 0. There will always be a cheeky mistake of the unforced variety, especially as Charles Leclerc's concerned because of how he drives. But yet and still, I mean, count on one hand last year how many mistakes of consequence he made. No, Abu Dhabi qualifying. Where were the other ones? Baku, free practice. What else did he do that was a big mistake? There were a couple of free practice, but I can't remember them. Whereas if you rewind back a couple of those seasons, there were loads. 2022, Imola, bloody France, Paul Ricard, Monaco, Baku. There were just loads. They just fall off the tongue, right? But now, all of a sudden, I've got to put some respect on Charles Leclerc's name, as do you, Umarch. You know about sporting excellence when you see it. And I think, sadly for Sir Lewis Hamilton, this means that he's joined Scuderia Ferrari, at the wrong time. 24 months too late, potentially, if indeed he wanted hedge money at Scuderia Ferrari. Oh, by the way, Helmut Marko has been talking again as he likes to. So Lewis Hamilton fans will say, what's he saying now? What's he saying now? Xenophobia ad infinitum in extremis. Helmut Marko being a relic of Formula One. Well, you know what? When you check out Helmut Marko's history, he's one of those ones, not dissimilar to Alain Prost or Niki Lauda, that when you check out the facts, when you peel back at the layered history of a Helmut Marko, then you start to realise who that dude is. And by dint of his not insubstantial achievements in motorsport more broadly, I've got to put some respect on his name. Has he got a cheeky quotable that's polemic and controversial in his locker? 1000%. But was he the one who had a Ferrari signed contract ready to go until he had his accident and his vision got impaired? And then they switched his position with who? The legend that is Niki Lauda. Niki, what? At the time when he was racing, he was mentioned in the same breath with Niki Lauda. Indeed, Ferrari were ready to give him the seat before they offered it to Niki. I mean, put some respect on that dude's name. He knows a good driver when he sees it. Real, recognise real, some say. And Helmut Marko stepped out yet again, and he's had something to say about Sir Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. Why? Because this is topic of the day, eh? It is topic of the day. Leclerc never had a car as fast as Max's. Apart from in the early stages of 2022, Andre, take that for whatever you will. It's a microcosm, and we said you need the car over the course of a championship, right? 24 races if you're going to judge him properly and fairly. But yeah, and so if you're going to use that early, the quarter one of 2022, you remember Bahrain and them going back and forth and the DRS chicken. If you're going to take that as a microcosm, there are lessons, there are learnings that you can read. Charles Leclerc picks up things very quickly and well. You can race Max Verstappen, but again, if you're talking about the minerals, it's consistency, isn't it? It's trending down the mistakes of the unforced variety to zero over the course of not just one race, over the course of a 24-race championship. But I digress. Here's what Helmut Marko has to say. Final topic on the docket is around third base. He's chiming in on Ferrari, and I feel like that is going to be the topic, the narrative, the plot line that continues to give throughout the season. How is Lewis going to fare against a fire-breathing dragon in Charles Leclerc? Who knows? Has Lewis still got it? Is he still in his prime? Is he going to look like Lewis of 2018? Or is he going to look like Lewis of 2024? There's a big difference, a big variable change. 40 years old, you know how steep that mountain climb is as far as its gradient. 3 champions ever have won at this age that Sir Lewis is at now. 1966 Brabham, 50 Farina, 57 Juan Manuel Fangio. It is difficult. How many drivers have ever won a championship in 3 different teams or more? 1. He has a name. His name is Juan Manuel Fangio. Ergo, if Lewis is doing it, and this isn't me saying that he's going to do it, this is me putting on my forensic accounting cap and saying statistically, if Lewis does get it done, he will be breathing rarefied air. Per Damon Hill, he's Mr. Unprecedented. If anybody can do it, Sir Lewis Hamilton can. But what I'm not going to do, again, objectivity, true value, and never sacrifice either one of the aforementioned at the altar of partisanship, not Lewis Hamilton or anybody else. If he's going to do it, it's going to be H-A-R-D. And I think that's what Helmut Marko is spelling out. Again, per Planet F1 article, Helmut Marko, advisor of Red Bull Racing, Red Bull GmbH consultant, has claimed that Charles Leclerc was much faster than Ferrari teammate Sir Lewis Hamilton during pre-season testing. He believes that Sir Lewis Hamilton's motivation could suffer if he sees no chance of winning. Oh, the humanity. Can we dissect for that? This has always been my issue with Sir Lewis. It's his gift and his curse, right? If he gets in a car and it suits him and he's got the confidence, the stability at the rear, can do the hard braking, V-line the corner, then there's probably nobody in history that's better than Lewis. You'll get 120% out of him then. But the problem is, can he do it on a rainy day in Sunderland? That's the old Leo Messi analogy. When things aren't perfect, how much do you lose from Sir Lewis Hamilton? And I think in brass tacks, that's the story. That's the story told by George Russell versus Lewis Hamilton over the past 2 years, right? That George has been able to adapt for the car and drive around its foibles and the ground effect and the funny tyres that give out during set. George has been able to drive around all of that chaos. Whereas Lewis, he's a hammer. He's not a nail. not at 40 years old, and so he needs to drive the car in the way that he's always driven it. Yeah, he can adapt a little bit, but I mean, he's bloody 40 years old. What are you going to do? Lewis Hamilton doesn't even get out of bed for less than 25 points. When it's on and he's a shark and he sniffs blood, aka 25 points, you get a Silverstone instance, and then all of a sudden it's not Lewis Hamilton of 2023 or 24. This is Lewis Hamilton of Singapore 2018 or 2008 Silverstone or 2007, as near as makes no difference, every single race. And this is the paradox, the dichotomy for which Lewis Hamilton will need to solve going into 2025 in them their red overalls with the yellow badge and the black prancing horse atop. Helmut Marko says, quote, in Bahrain, Leclerc was the much faster one. Oh, the humanity. What are you seeing? What are you seeing, Helmut Marko, that we're not seeing? But again, that fits with what most aficionados are saying, right? That Charles Leclerc is always going to be the quickest in qualifying. If Lewis Hamilton is going to beat him, then all of his best work is going to be done in the race proper. I don't think, therefore, what Helmut Marko is saying is that offensive and or controversial and or polemic. Marko continues, but that's normal. He knows the team, does Charles. He knows the car. Hamilton drove a lot of laps, gradually improved, but was not quite at Charles Leclerc's level. Oh, the humanity. Rogue science guy. Has Lewis ever impressed in pre-season? It's a good, you know what, Rogue? It's a good shout, to be fair. I think he's one of those ones that does his best. He'll always do his best work in the race when he's racing for 25 points in proper pressure, real circumstance, wheel-to-wheel combat, because that's when his strengths come to the fore now. The ability to manage tyres over the course of a race, distance, wheel-to-wheel combat, etc. That's Lewis's forte. That's always been front and centre as far as his strengths, and that's why you see a Silverstone when he all of a sudden he comes alive, he wakes up and remembers who he is. He's going to need those circumstances again. Helmut Marko continues, only the racing is coming, he continues, and we know that Lewis Hamilton, if the whole environment fits, can improve incredibly. He's saying that this is brand new for Lewis, and that's true. Of course, that's true. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to acclimatise. There's a lot of gap to be gained on Charles Leclerc already, who has a head start as far as fostering rapport, creating relationships, understanding the team and the individuals, and trying to get the best out of them. Indeed, you could say, as at the 9th of the 3rd, 2025, that Charles Leclerc has already gained ground on Lewis in years in terms of building that team in his image. This is Michael Schumacher feats that we're talking about now. Helmut Marko continues. One, as far as differentiating between Charles and Lewis. One is a multiple world champion. The other is chasing his first title, but is one of the best qualifiers. Because the field is relatively close together, 3 or 4 tenths of a second difference in qualifying can make up 3 or 4 or 5 positions on the grid. Oh, the humanity. I feel like Helmut Marko is dropping truth here, chat. Because it's the final year of the season of these regs, right? 2026, it's bloody active aero, new tyres, new engine unit, all this different stuff. And if past his prologue, per James Vowles, per Toto Wolff, per Frederick Vasseur, we should get one of the best ever seasons in F1 history. Why? Because it's convergent settings. There should be 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even 6 drivers in cars that are capable of winning races. So then you're tuning, because you never know who's going to take it on any given Sunday. We know that McLaren potentially have the whip hand, potentially the quickest machine going into the first race in 2025. But does that mean that any given Sunday that Max can't turn up and win 25 points, or a Charles or a Lewis? And in that sense, if it is going to be close, under that umbrella heading, that means surely that Lewis Hamilton needs to out-qualify Lewis, because that's when the qualifying places mean all the more. If it's dominance, say like Max in 2022 or 2023, Max can afford to do a Miami and qualify 9th and just come through the field, because the only person that he's got to fight with will be his teammate, the Mexican Minister of Defense, Checo Perez. But if it's concertinaed, if the field is close and there's a couple tenths up and down the grid, then those qualifying positions are going to matter. We saw it last season, right? As an example, Las Vegas, Lewis Hamilton coming through the field. He's never going to get first It's borderline impossible unless there's changeable circumstance, rain, safety car. Very rarely will you qualify lower than 6th or 7th and manage to drop it on pole without the racing god smiling on you. Helmut Marko continues. You know how difficult overtaking is these days. That's why qualifying ahead of Charles Leclerc for Lewis Hamilton will be more important than ever. So from this point of view, it is crucial, therefore, for Lewis Hamilton to be able to evaluate the first qualifying sessions on equal footing with Leclerc, but that's certainly not going to be easy. Oh, the humanity. No kidding, Sherlock. Qualifying demon is what Charles Leclerc epitomises. I think Helmut Marko is right. I think he's trying desperately to say something controversial, but I think he's hit the bullseye here. Continues. He went to Ferrari of his own volition. He was looking for this new challenge, and I think he will do everything, Lewis Hamilton, to ensure that his expectations are met. Again, no kidding, Sherlock. He's doing everything in real time, isn't he? He's trying to foster rapport. He's learning Italian. He's moved to Milan. All of these things have to stack up. He's stacking the probability in his favours, therefore. As I said, continues Marko, bookending with this. These are early days, and again, Hamilton can both supernaturally improve, whatever that means, but it could be also that if the factors don't fit together, he sees no chance of winning, and then he loses some of his motivation. Oh, the humanity. Oh, gee, Zilla. It doesn't make good reading, does it? Now, look. Motivation, it's hard to read somebody's motivation. These aren't one of those, this is like a Tom Brady intangible. How can you read somebody's motivation? You can't measure biceps to determine how motivated or unmotivated somebody might be. But at the age of 40 years old, is Lewis Hamilton the most motivated that he's ever been in his career? Potentially. Potentially is revitalised by going to Milan, by putting on them their red overalls with the yellow badge and black pants in horse top. Maybe he is. Who knows? But what won't help Lewis Hamilton's motivation if all of a sudden he jumps into that car, Australia, and he gets roundly out-qualified by Charles Leclerc. That it's just 2024 1.0, getting roundly out-qualified as near as makes no difference every single race by George Russell. That will not help Lewis Hamilton. And what fears me, what makes me scared, is that if I know anything about Lewis Hamilton and past his prologue, Lewis doesn't get out the gate quick, and he will need to this year. We've already heard rumour that at Monaco, Ferrari will make a call. What they don't want to do is what McLaren did last year. Wheel of fortune type settings, not make a decision and have it cost them. We know that Frederick Vasseur, the 10-timer, is turned over on his tenure. 3 years on average over the past couple team principals at McLaren. That's how long you get unless you're going to start to bring in silverware. This is Frederick Vasseur's 3rd year in that role. He said already in a multitude of interviews, sack off the marketing for Lewis. I don't care about the Met Gala or Mission 44. It's very un-PC of me to say, said Fred. All I care about, all we care about is Sir Lewis Hamilton's ability to deliver with a view to win championship. That's all. Nothing more or less complicated than that. So too, John Elkann echoed those sentiments. You best believe it's a positive externality, Sharrison, you legend, to witness Sir Lewis Hamilton 10th British Grand Prix from... Oh, Sharrison, don't make me jealous, mate. It would have been incredible. Although I'd have probably been crying too much to witness it. I would have been able to see it had I been there in person. Let me say this. John Elkann echoed Frederick Vasseur's sentiments, didn't he? He said, yeah, all the other stuff is fantastic. Yet, of course, as our strategic objectives, Ferrari want to develop themselves as a luxury brand. Every time you look in their financial statements as their strategic objectives up front, they will put forth something to that effect. No longer do they just want to be a sports car brand. They want to be, as an entity, a luxury brand. And who better on the grid in F1 to facilitate, no, enable that as a journey than Sir Lewis Hamilton, of course. But John Elkann said, yeah, that's all good. That's ground level, ground zero per se. But what better to get us to that level, that luxury brand, that next level as far as an entity and a company as Scuderia Ferrari than having a Sir Lewis Hamilton who goes and delivers, who wins races and quite possibly championships. However, not to pour water on the Sir Lewis Hamilton flag. I feel like I just riled myself up and I'm believing, starting to see Sir Lewis's halo again. Of course he's going to win the 8th championship. Of course he is, Cameron. Objectivity, truth value, what are those? Go on, let me tell you this, because I always like to defer to the odds makers, the experts, the forensic accountants in the room, because they'll put a number on it. In Australia, they have Charles Leclerc currently 18.18% chance, recurring of course, of winning the Australian Grand Prix. Lewis, have a guess, 12.5%. That's a difference of 6 percentage points, a difference of 45% in probability. That's chaos, chat. They are overweighting one Charles Leclerc, aka modern day Jean Alesi, and underweighting Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. What do they know that we don't? As far as the Drivers' Championship, again, I defer to the odds makers because they're infinitely more wise in all things than all things this concerned probability in F1 than I. Here's what they give Charles Leclerc. World Drivers' Championship, yeah. In fact, I'll read out Lewis's first. 11.7647%. Let's round up and just call it 12. Charles Leclerc, 15.4%. It's a difference of 4 percentage points as near as makes no difference. And 31% if we're doing variances. That again, chat, is material. I'm going to read out those one more time. To win the Australian Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc per the odds makers 18%, Lewis Hamilton 12.5%. To win the championship, Charles Leclerc 15.4%, Lewis Hamilton 11.7%. Go on then. As we round third base, what do they know that we don't? So Lewis Hamilton, one of the goatiest ones to have ever done it, 40 years old, unprecedented. Per Damon Hill, if there was a chap that disproves the theory, the common knowledge convention that turns all of that on its head and has made a career out of doing it, then that chap has a name, and his name is Sir Lewis Hamilton. However, per the odds makers, discount everything that I say, do your own research. Per the odds makers, the hill that Lewis will need to climb to win himself an unprecedented 8th World Championship, to go clear of the man currently tied, with whom he's currently tied, one Michael Reagan-Meister Schumacher on 7, to do all of the aforementioned, to win an unprecedented third team, to bring Ferrari, the red team with a yellow badge and a black prancing horse atop, to bring them back to the mountaintop. But the avoidance of doubt is not going to be an easy endeavour. If he does it, there will be no more talk about who is the greatest. The questions cannot even be asked. It would be disingenuous to, because that's the incredulity with which this feat comes. It's my story, chat, and I'm sticking to it.